The rain came down in sheets, a Miami deluge that turned the neon glow of La Palmera into a watercolor blur. Outside, little Havana was drowning, but inside, the air was thick with the competing smells of frying platanos, strong Cuban coffee, and the damp wool of soaked patrons. A salsa track pulsed from the old jukebox in the corner, a frantic, joyful heartbeat against the storm's angry drumming on the tin roof. I felt none of it. My world had shrunk to the rhythmic squeak of a wet rag on glass and the numbers marching relentlessly through my head. $187 for this week's dialysis copay, $72 for the phosphate binders, another $40 for the specialized renal diet groceries. The numbers were a litany, a prayer to a God I wasn't sure was listening. Every polished glass, every refilled coffee cup was a tiny chip against the mountain of my stepmother's failing kidneys. The debt was an anchor, and I was treading water in a storm of my own. I was so lost in the grim arithmetic that I didn't see him until he was right there, leaning against the worn linoleum of the counter. The music and laughter seemed to warp around him, creating a pocket of sudden, chilling silence. He was tall, dressed in a white linen shirt that was now translucent with rain, clinging to the hard lines of his chest and shoulders. The scent of him hit me first, not the city grime of the storm, but something cleaner, sharper, salt from the sea, the rich, earthy tang of an expensive cigar, and something else, something metallic and unsettling, like ozone and danger. He swayed, one hand gripping the counter's edge so tightly his knuckles were white mountains on a pale landscape. His other hand was pressed to his abdomen. Water dripped from his dark hair onto the floor, forming a small, personal puddle at his feet. But it was his eyes that seized my breath. They were the color of steel on a cloudy day, a piercing, intelligent gray that was now clouded with a terrifying fog of pain and confusion. His lips, pale and drawn, barely moved. Please. The word was a ragged whisper, swallowed by the music. He tried again, his voice gravelly, strained. Please help me. They put something in my glass. The world tilted. The salsa music faded to a distant thrum. My focus narrowed to the man in front of me, to the fine sheen of cold sweat on his forehead, the unnatural pallor of his skin under the diner's fluorescent lights. My half-forgotten EMT training, abandoned when Mom's first diagnosis came back and tuition became a fantasy, flared to life in my mind. The mental checklist started running itself. Altered mental state, diaphoresis, bradycardia. I could almost hear his heart slowing down from here. My instructor, a gruff ex-paramedic named Miller, was screaming in my memory. Look at the pupils. Heart, look at the skin. What does it tell you? It told me this was bad. Not food poisoning bad. This was clinical. This was poison, specifically. The symptoms clicked into a terrifying pattern. Digitalis, foxglove, a cardiac toxin that could stop a heart with brutal efficiency. He began to slide, his grip on the counter failing. As his hand slipped away, something gold and heavy clattered onto the floor. A signet ring. It spun for a second before settling, and even in the dim light, the design was unmistakable. A raven in flight, wings spread wide, etched with intricate, severe detail. The Rook family crest. My blood went cold. Even a broke waitress in Little Havana knew that symbol. The Rook lineage. They weren't just gangsters. They were an institution, a shadow government that owned the port of Miami, from the towering cranes that unloaded cargo ships to the unions that controlled the dock workers, and the man wearing their ring. The man dying in front of me could only be one person. The other customers were oblivious, laughing louder as a gust of wind rattled the front windows, signaling the hurricane's imminent arrival. Their world was beer and empanadas and the coming storm. My world had just become this man. Fear was a physical thing, a cold hand squeezing my lungs. The right thing to do was call 911. The safe thing to do was to back away, to pretend I saw nothing. But then his steel gray eyes met mine again, and beneath the pain, There was a desperate plea. It wasn't a command from a man used to giving them. It was the raw, elemental request of a human being asking another not to let him die. I saw Miller's disappointed scowl in my mind's eye. You run towards the screaming, heart, not away. I made a decision. It felt less like a choice and more like jumping off a cliff because the ground behind me was on fire. Manny, I snapped at the young busboy clearing a nearby table. Lock the front door. Now, tell everyone we're closing early because of the storm. His eyes widened, but he didn't argue. I shoved a tray of cooling empanadas aside, the metal screeching against the counter. Grabbing the man's arm, I heaved him up. He was heavier than he looked, all dense muscle and dead weight. Come on, with me. I half dragged, half carried him towards the back, past the sizzling grill and into the cramped, humid storeroom. It smelled of onions and cleaning bleach. I flicked on the single bare bulb, which cast long, dancing shadows around us. I lowered him to the floor, propping his back against sacks of rice. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He licked his dry lips, his breath coming in shallow pants. "Cassian," he rasped. "Cassian Rook." The confirmation landed like a punch to the gut. The head of the Rook lineage himself. I was in so far over my head I couldn't even see the surface anymore. "Okay, Cassian, I don't have an antidote, I don't have a hospital, but I'm not going to let you die on my floor. My EMT training was a flickering candle in a hurricane, but it was all I had. First, stabilize. The poison was in his gut. It had to come out. I need you to listen to me. I'm going to help you get sick. It's not going to be pleasant, but it might save your life. Do you understand?" He gave a weak, jerky nod. I worked fast, my hands moving with a purpose I didn't know they still possessed. I cleared his airway. Tilting his head back, I kept talking to him, a low, steady stream of instructions, keeping him conscious, keeping him tethered to the world. Then I yelled for my boss, Mr. Ortiz, a kind, round man who'd seen too much in his 60 years to be easily shocked. "Ortiz, I need the activated charcoal, the medical-grade stuff you keep for the drunks." He appeared at the door a moment later, his face a mask of concern, a dusty black bottle in his hand. He didn't ask questions. He just handed it over and stood guard at the door. As I was mixing the charcoal with a bottle of water, Cassian's wallet slipped from his pants pocket and fell open on the concrete floor. Amid the credit cards and a thick fold of cash, a single piece of metal glinted under the bare bulb. It wasn't a credit card. It was thinner, made of brushed titanium, with a single line of text etched into it, Silo 19, Pier 7. Before I could process it, the front door of the diner crashed open with a force that shook the whole building. Two figures stood silhouetted against the storm-lashed street, water cascading from their long, black raincoats. They weren't cops. Their movements were too fluid, too predatory. Their eyes swept the room, dismissive of the few remaining patrons, hunting for something specific, for someone. The Ravello Combine, the Rook's bitter rivals. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Without thinking, I slapped the light switch in the storeroom, plunging us into near total darkness. The only light was a thin sliver from under the door. I snatched the metal card from the floor and shoved it deep into my sock, the cold metal a secret shock against my skin. Ortiz, seeing the men, quietly shut the storeroom door, his shadow vanishing from the crack. I grabbed Cassian's arm. He was weaker now, his body shuddering with violent tremors. "We have to go. Now. There's a back way." I pulled him through the rear of the storeroom, past shelves of canned goods, to a rusty metal door that opened into the alley. The moment I pushed it open, the hurricane screamed in, throwing a wall of water and garbage-scented wind at us. It was a maelstrom. The alley was a narrow canyon of overflowing dumpsters and slick, cracked pavement. A distant ship's foghorn groaned, a lonely, mournful sound. My heart beat in a frantic rhythm that matched the whipping rain and my own terror. We stumbled through the deluge, Cassian leaning heavily on me. He was trembling uncontrollably, not just from the poison, but from the cold. As we reached the end of the alley, he stopped, his grip tightening on my wrist. His strength was surprising, a spark of the power he usually wielded. He looked at me, his eyes dark pools in the stormy night. "They can't see me driving," he whispered, his voice hoarse but firm. "They'll be watching the car. You drive." Before I could protest, before I could tell him I hadn't driven anything more powerful than my rusty 10-speed bike in 5 years, he pressed a set of keys into my palm. They were heavy, attached to a simple leather fob. He nodded towards the street, where a car was parked half hidden in the shadows. It wasn't a modern luxury sedan. It was a classic, a long, dark beast of American muscle, a vintage Pontiac GTO. The engine turned over with a deep, throaty roar that felt like it shook the very foundations of the city. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white. Rain hammered the windshield, the wipers fighting a losing battle. I slammed the car into gear, stomped on the gas, and we shot out onto the flooded street. In the rearview mirror, through the distorted sheet of rain, I saw it. A pair of headlights peeling away from the curb near the diner, accelerating, their beams cutting through the darkness, fixed directly on us. They were coming, and we were running. The GTO's engine was a caged lion, roaring in protest as I forced it through streets that had become shallow rivers. The world outside the windshield was a liquid chaos of displaced palm fronds and overflowing gutters. My knuckles were fused to the steering wheel. Beside me, Cassian was a dead weight, his breathing a shallow, hitching sound that was more terrifying than the storm. Those headlights stayed glued to our bumper, relentless. They weren't cops. Cops wouldn't pursue this recklessly in a hurricane. These were the men from the diner, the Ravellos. "Turn left here." Cassian's voice was a bare thread of sound, but it sliced through my panic. I yanked the wheel, sending a tsunami of gray water over the sidewalk. We skidded onto a narrower street lined with drenched, skeletal palm trees. The headlights followed. My heart felt like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. My breath was coming in short, useless gasps. "Why me?" I choked out, the question aimed at him, at the universe, at the sheer insanity of the last 10 minutes. "You're Cassian Rook. Why didn't your people save you? Why trust a waitress?" He was slumped against the passenger door, but his head turned slightly. His eyes were half open, the steel gray clouded with a lethal haze, but they were fixed on me. They tried. He rasped, each word costing him. The whine. It was fast. I got out. I just ran. He coughed, a dry, painful sound. "I saw your face. At the counter. Everyone else was laughing. You were counting." A ghost of a smile touched his pale lips. "When I fell, you ran towards the dying man. Not away. That's rare." His words didn't make me feel brave. They made me feel trapped. I was rare. I was just trying to pay for dialysis. A new sound joined the storm, a high-pitched, angry whine, like a giant mosquito. It grew louder, separating itself from the wind and the roar of our engine. A motorcycle. It materialized on my left, a black-clad rider hunched over the handlebars, his face obscured by a dark visor. He was pacing us, matching my speed despite the slick pavement. I swerved, trying to shake him, but he stuck to us like oil. Then, a sharp metallic crack. My side mirror didn't just break, it exploded. A spider web of an impact crater appeared for a millisecond before the glass vanished, pulverized by a small, fast projectile. A shot, muffled by the storm, but unmistakable. I screamed. It was pure animal instinct. I didn't think. I just reacted. My foot slammed the brake pedal as my hands wrenched the wheel to the right. It was the stupidest and smartest thing I could have done. The GTO, heavy and built of solid steel, protested. The back end fishtailed violently on the wet asphalt. The motorcycle, caught completely off guard by the sudden stop and swerve, had nowhere to go. The rider tried to correct, his bike sliding sideways. He went down in a spray of sparks and rainwater, disappearing under the wheels of the car that had been tailgating us. I heard the sickening crunch of metal on metal, a muffled shout, and the squeal of tires in the empty space where my mirror used to be. I saw the trailing car swerve wildly, its front end crumpled. Having T-boned the fallen bike, it slewed to a stop, blocked by its own wreckage. We were clear. "The port," Cassian breathed, his voice weaker now. "Pier 7, container yard, blue crane. Find the blue crane." I didn't ask how he knew they'd stopped chasing. I just stomped on the accelerator. The Pontiac leaped forward, leaving the chaos behind us. The port was a different world, a city of giants. The rain was even heavier here, driven by a coastal wind that smelled of salt, rust, and diesel. I navigated the maze of towering container stacks, my headlights cutting feeble tunnels in the darkness. I finally spotted it, a massive gantry crane, painted a faded blue, looming over a dark alley between two walls of red containers. I killed the engine and the headlights. The sudden silence was deafening, filled only by the relentless drumming of rain on the metal roof, a hollow, lonely sound. We were plunged into an oppressive darkness, broken only by the dim, watery glow of a distant security lamp. Cash and I whispered. No answer. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy and cold. The screen flared to life, momentarily blinding me. I turned on the flashlight app, the bright LED beam cutting through the gloom. He was worse, much worse. His skin was clammy and had a grayish tint. His breathing was dangerously shallow, his chest barely moving. The poison was winning. "No, you don't get to die on me now," I muttered, the words a fierce promise to myself. I unbuckled him, dragging his torso upright. "Cassian, stay with me. I need you to breathe, slow and steady." I placed my palm flat on his sternum, feeling the erratic, thready pulse beneath. It was too slow, far too slow. Digitalis toxicity, bradycardia. Miller's voice again. I shone the light in his eyes. His pupils were tiny, unresponsive. "Okay, Cassian, okay." I was talking to myself now, fighting the panic that was clawing at my throat. I had to keep him stable. I had to keep him breathing. "It was at the gala," he suddenly whispered, his eyes fluttering open. The words were slurred, emerging from the fog. "East Coast Renaissance Fund, Ravello's, front." He tried to focus on my face. My glass tasted wrong, bitter. "Shh, don't talk. Save your strength." "Can't go. Hospital," he insisted, while his fingers weakly gripping my arm. "The BPI, Bureau of Port Integrity. They'll call Ravello before the doctor. The Port Authority. They're compromised." The naive question was out of my mouth before I could stop it. A dry, rattling sound escaped his chest. It might have been a laugh. "Compromised Elodie. They're on the payroll. Ravello bought the BPI." A cold dread, deeper than the storm, settled over me. We were totally alone. No cops, no paramedics, just me, a dying Mafia boss, and a whole city that wanted him dead. As if summoned by his words, a new sound cut through the rain, the deep, mournful horn of a tugboat, impossibly close. It was so loud it vibrated in my teeth. I flinched, my eyes scanning the darkness outside, and then I saw it. One of the containers in the red wall opposite us wasn't fully closed, a dark slit, barely visible. As I watched, the slit widened. The heavy metal door of the container was moving, sliding open with a low, hydraulic hiss that was perfectly masked by the storm. A figure emerged, stepping from the absolute blackness of the container's interior. It was a woman, tall and lean, dressed in black tactical gear that shed the rain like a second skin. She moved with an eerie, silent grace, a stark contrast to my clumsy panic. She held a small, powerful flashlight, its beam sweeping the yard before locking onto the GTO. She was at my door in 3 strides. Pulling it open, I recoiled, shielding Cassian with my body. "He's here. Boss, can you hear me?" Her voice was low, calm, and packed with authority. She wasn't asking me. She was talking to him. "Aria," Cassian breathed, a rush of profound relief in that single word. The woman, Aria, looked at me. Her eyes were dark and assessing, taking in my cheap waitress uniform, my shaking hands, the phone in my lap. "Who are you?" "She helped me." Cassian managed. The diner. Arya's gaze didn't soften, but it shifted from threat assessment to tactical evaluation. Good, get out. I'll take it from here. She was already reaching for Cassian, a heavy-duty black medical kit appearing in her other hand. No. The word was out of my mouth before I even knew I was going to say it. It was small, but it stopped her cold. She turned her full attention back to me. It felt like being pinned by an insect collector. What did you say? I took a breath, forcing my voice to steady. I had nothing, no power, no money, no weapons. All I had was the last 30 minutes and a semester of abandoned training. I said no. I was the first responder. I know his baseline from 30 minutes ago. I know what I did. You come in and change the protocol now. You could shock his system. You don't know what I gave him. I gave him activated charcoal at the diner. I said, my voice gaining strength. He's showing severe bradycardia and visual disturbances. I've been maintaining his airway. You interrupt my stabilization, he could arrest. Arya stared at me, her expression unreadable in the harsh shadows. I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was weighing the time it would take to argue with me, or simply remove me, against the seconds Cassian didn't have. Finally, she gave a short, sharp nod. Fine, what do you need? The kit. What's in it? She tossed the heavy bag onto my lap. Atropine, IV setup, fluid bags, more charcoal, and Digibind. Digibind, the antidote. My hands flew to the zipper. Okay, I need you to get an IV line started. I'll prep the antidote. We need to push the atropine first to get his heart rate up before we give the fab fragments, or he'll bottom out. For the first time, a flicker of surprise crossed her face, but she just nodded. Which arm? We worked in silence, a strange, frantic ballet in the cramped front seat of the GTO. The rain had softened, its furious drumming easing to a steady, rhythmic patter. Arya was frighteningly efficient, starting the IV line in Cassian's arm with a practiced, steady hand in the pitching darkness. I prepped the syringes. My mind locked onto doses and flow rates, the numbers on the vials illuminated by my phone's beam. I administered the drugs, my hands surprisingly steady as I pushed the plunger. We sat in silence for a long moment, the only sounds the rain and Cassian's slow, pained breathing. Then he groaned, his whole body tensed, a long, shuddering tremor that seemed to rack him from the inside out. He's shivering, Arya noted, her voice tight. It's the toxin and shock. I reached into the back seat, grabbing the emergency blanket I'd seen tucked there. It was woefully thin. We need to get him warm. Recovery position now. Together, we eased him out of the car and into the relative dryness of the open container. It was a mobile command center. Dark screens and electronics lining one wall, all of it dormant. We laid him on the cold metal floor. This isn't enough, I said, chafing his arms. Arya disappeared back into the GTO, returning with 2 chemical heat packs from her kit. She cracked them, and I tucked them against his chest and under his arms. I guided him onto his side, tilting his head back to protect his airway. His eyes flickered open again. The fog was receding. The steel gray was still diluted, but it was focused. It was focused on me, on my hands. My hands, they were a mess, red and raw from the diner's scalding water, cuticles chewed, a fresh smear of grease from the car door. They were hands that scrubbed and carried and worried. They were ugly, practical, working hands. His gaze lifted from my hands to my face. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. In that one look, trapped between the edge of death and a slow return, I saw something shift. The cold assessment of the Mafia boss was gone, replaced by a raw, unguarded gratitude. It was a spark, a tiny ember of warmth in the middle of the coldest, wettest night of my life. He breathed my name, Elodie. Arya Vale was already on her feet, her ear to a small communications device. He's stable, but compromised. We need extraction. Silo 19, 10 minutes. She clicked it off and looked down at us. You did good, she said. It sounded like the highest praise she was capable of giving. I didn't know what to say. I just did what Miller taught me. Arya crouched down, her eyes locking with mine. You need to understand what just happened. You saved Cassian Rook. The Ravellos know a woman was with him. They know the car. They will hunt you." She reached into a sheath on her boot and produced a small, beautifully crafted folding knife. The handle was dark, smooth wood. She pressed it into my hand, closing my fingers around it. "Welcome to the radar. Elodie Hart," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Little Havana and the Rook lineage. Owe you a debt. That's a dangerous thing to hold." She turned to leave, then paused at the container door, looking back at me. "Stay with him until the transport gets here. And Elodie. And don't get used to giving me orders." She vanished back into the rain, leaving me alone in the darkness with the most powerful and most vulnerable man in Miami. The transport was a black van with no windows and an engine so quiet I didn't hear it arrive. Aria drove the GTO into a different, larger container, and we walked through a damp, narrow tunnel, emerging into Silo 19. The name was a lie. It wasn't just a silo. It was the nerve center of the Rook lineage, carved into the guts of an old cement factory on Pier 7. The air smelled of old concrete, ozone, and fresh, strong coffee. The curved walls were covered in a massive, sprawling digital map of Miami, glowing with hundreds of data points. Cassian was seated at a central console, his face still pale and etched with exhaustion, but the fog in his steel-gray eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating fire. The antidote had worked, but the poison had left its mark. He moved stiffly, a man betrayed by his own body. Aria stood nearby, monitoring 3 different comms channels at once. "They didn't just try to sideline me," Cassian said, his voice a low rasp. "Digitalis, it's slow. They wanted me to be conscious. They wanted to frame it, make it look like a heart attack. Or a long overdue consequence," Aria finished, her voice flat. On the main screen, a layout of the East Coast Renaissance Fund Gala was displayed. "The waiter," Cassian said, pointing to a blurred security still. "He wasn't on the roster. I checked." I moved closer, peering at the grainy image. The man was nondescript, but his hand, holding the tray, caught my eye. He was wearing a ring. I said, the memory surfacing. "When I was counting my tips, I saw a man at the bar, paying his tab. He had the same ring. It's not a cormorant or a raven, it's a pelican." Aria's head snapped toward me. "The Pelican crew. They're small time. They just move contraband seafood." "Exactly," I said, the pieces clicking in my mind. "They supply a chain of high-end seafood restaurants. La Perla Marina, Ocean's Crown, the Gables Catch." Aria's fingers flew across a keyboard. In seconds, a web of connections appeared on the screen, linking the restaurants to a series of shell corporations, all owned by Ravello. She confirmed, her voice tight with anger. "Their fronts, a way to launder money through overpriced lobster." "It's not just the money," I said, my old EMT knowledge surfacing again. "Digitalis is from foxglove, but down here, oleander is more common. It's a decorative plant. You can grow fields of it, and no one would look twice. If one of those shell companies owns a nursery or a landscaping business." Aria found it in less than a minute. A large, walled-off property in the Glades, listed as an agricultural research farm, the poison source, Cassian concluded. He looked at me, his gaze heavy. "Elodie, you've done more than enough. Aria will get you a car. Money. We have a safe house in Key West. You'll be comfortable until this is over." The offer was tempting. I could take the money, pay off the dialysis bills, and disappear. I could go back to being invisible. But looking at the map, at the spider web of corruption that had nearly killed this man and had definitely infested my city, I felt a new, unfamiliar anger. They had hunted me. They had put their hands into my world. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the hum of the servers. Cassian raised an eyebrow. "That wasn't a request." "You're wrong about them," I said, meeting his gaze. "They saw me. They know my face. If I run, I'm just a loose end they need to tie up. But if I stay, I'm just the poor waitress from La Palmera. I'm the woman who got scared and ran. They won't look at me twice. They'll be looking for a professional. One of your people. They won't be looking for me. That's my advantage." Arya scoffed. "She has a point. Cassian, but she's untrained. She's a liability." "Then train me," I retorted. Cassian studied me for a long, silent moment. The air crackled. He was weighing my life against his strategy. Finally, he gave a short nod. "Arya, you wanted to invoke the Private Port Security Act? Do it. Hit their seafood warehouses. A full, aggressive audit. We'll say we're looking for contraband." Arya shook her head. "No, I can't. We move on them. They move on us. And right now, we're blind. The BPI is on their payroll. Half my port contacts have gone silent since the gala. We have a leak. Cassian, a bad one. Someone inside the lineage told them you'd be at that gala with minimal security." The admission hung in the air. Heavy and toxic as the poison had been, the Rook lineage was compromised. The silence stretched. My mind was racing, not with fear this time, but with cold, hard logic, the logic of survival. "So, don't make a real move," I said. They both looked at me. "Don't hit their assets. Hit a ghost." I pointed to a blank spot on the port map, an old, decommissioned shipping lane. "You said you have a leak, a mole. Moles only come up when they smell food. So, give them food." I looked at Arya. "You create a fake shipment, something valuable, something Ravello would kill for, a ghost shipment. You codename it, Viridian or something. You log it on a secure channel, one you suspect is being watched. You don't move a single box. You just watch. You watch who takes the bait." Arya's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed in grudging respect. Cassian, however, smiled. It was a true smile. A slight upward tilt of one corner of his mouth, but it lit his face, chasing the shadows from his eyes for a second. "A ghost shipment," he repeated. "To catch a mole." He nodded. "Do it. Arya, Project Viridian is now live." He turned to me. "If you're staying, you're not a liability. You're an asset, and assets need to be protected." He led me up a metal staircase to the roof of the silo. The storm had passed, leaving the Miami skyline scrubbed clean and glittering against a bruised, pre-dawn sky. The wind up here was sharp, carrying the sting of the open sea. Arya had given me a simple semi-automatic pistol. It was heavy, cold, and felt alien in my hand. I held it like it was a snake, my arms stiff, my shoulders hunched. "You're afraid of it," Cassian observed, standing behind me, and he was close, but not touching. "Good. Don't ever lose that. But you will respect it. You will control it." He adjusted my stance, his hands briefly on my shoulders, guiding me to drop my weight, to find my center, not like a waitress holding a tray. LED, like an anchor. "Plant your feet." I tried, but the weapon still wavered. I was aiming at a rusted oil drum 50 feet away. "You're fighting yourself," he said. His voice was low, patient. He stepped behind me, his body shielding me from the wind. His proximity was overwhelming. He still smelled of salt, but now also of the clean, antiseptic scent of the antidote and the faint, warm, human smell of his own skin. "Breathe out," he murmured, his voice near my ear. His hand came up, not to touch me, but to cover my own on the grip. His hand was warm, steady, and scarred. It enveloped mine, correcting my grip, aligning my finger on the trigger. "Your elbow is locked. Relax." He gently pressed my elbow down. The simple, clinical touch sent a jolt through me that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the man. The air changed. The wind, the city, the danger, it all faded, shrinking to the space between us, to the warmth of his hand on mine, the solid presence of his chest at my back. I could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart, a heart I had helped restart. "Squeeze," he commanded. "Don't pull." I squeezed. The explosion was deafening. The recoil slammed my arm up, but his hand was there, absorbing the shock. The shot went wide, pinging off the concrete floor 10 feet in front of the drum. I flinched, but he didn't let go. Again, find your target. Breathe. Squeeze. We stood there for an hour as the sun began to paint the clouds pink and orange, shot after shot, his hand guiding mine, his voice a steady presence in my ear, until my arms ached and the smell of gunpowder clung to my skin. And I stopped missing. Later, we sat in the silo's small, functional kitchen, nursing mugs of coffee. My hands were shaking, the adrenaline of the training session ebbing away. He watched me over the rim of his mug. Why EMT training, he asked. It wasn't an interrogation, it was genuine curiosity. I looked down at my coffee. My stepmother, Maria, she's not well. Her kidneys. I thought if I could get certified, I could get a better job. Maybe even on a hospital transport team. The classes were at night, but then her condition worsened, and the bills won. I tried for a light laugh, but it came out dry and brittle. So I took more shifts at La Palmera. It's funny. I learned just enough to save the most powerful man in Miami, but not enough to save myself from debt. He didn't offer pity. He didn't offer money, for which I was grateful. He just listened. He nodded, his gaze thoughtful, and filed the information away. That silence, that simple act of hearing me, felt more intimate than the lesson on the roof. You have good instincts. Elodie, he said quietly. You see patterns, the pelican ring, the ghost shipment. That's more valuable than a good shot. Aria entered the kitchen, her face grim. She didn't speak. She just tapped a command into a tablet and angled the screen toward us. It was security footage, time-stamped 2 minutes ago, a dark sedan, pulling up to the abandoned shipping lane we had designated for Project Viridian. 2 men got out, surveyed the empty docks, and then quickly retreated. Ravello's men. They took the bait, Aria said, her voice laced with venom. The log was only active for an hour. Someone inside our system fed them the location. Nightingale, Cashin said, the name sounding like a curse. It's a signature, Aria explained, seeing my confusion in the breached data logs, a tiny, encrypted file left behind when decrypted. It's just the musical notation for a Nightingale song. I've been tracking it for months. I think it's Alex Kincaid in accounting. He has access to the financials. I shook my head, my intuition nagging at me. An accountant sees the money, but who sees the physical routes? Who knows the port schedules? The blind spots, the delivery manifests? Kincaid might move the numbers, but someone else is moving the pieces. A driver, a dispatcher, someone everyone trusts. Aria looked like she wanted to dismiss me, but Cassian was listening, his eyes fixed on mine. We went back to the roof, the tension from before replaced by a new, colder reality. The mole was real. The enemy was inside. The sun was up now, but the Miami morning felt cold. The wind was relentless, whipping my thin diner uniform against my legs. I shivered, rubbing my arms. Cassian, who'd been watching the port operations through a pair of binoculars, turned without a word. He stripped off his suit jacket, the one that had survived the rain and the poisoning, and draped it over my shoulders. It was impossibly warm, insulating me instantly from the wind. It was also huge, swallowing my small frame, the sleeves hanging past my fingertips. It smelled of him that expensive, clean scent of salt and linen, with a faint, lingering trace of cigar. I pulled it tighter, clutching the lapels. The simple, protective gesture felt overwhelmingly personal. It was a shield. He was shielding me. The distance between us, which had been a canyon of status and danger, had collapsed, shrinking to the warmth of his jacket. I was about to thank him when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I'd almost forgotten it. I pulled it out, expecting a worried text from Maria. It was an unknown number. I opened the message. There were no words, just a single photograph. It was the front door of my apartment building, the chipped green paint, the rusty 3B on the door, my welcome mat, the one with the faded sunflowers. A second message came through immediately. Leave him, little bird, or the next picture will be of the inside. I stared at the phone, the image of my own front door burning into my retinas, the cheap green paint, the rusty 3BA, the faded sunflower mat. It was a violation. They had been there. They had put their hands on my world. Cassian saw the change in my face before he saw the phone. His hand, which had been resting on the silo's railing, clenched into a fist. I turned the screen toward him. The warmth that had been in his eyes when he covered me with his jacket was gone. Extinguished. Replaced by a glacial fury that was more frightening than the storm. "It's a trap," Arya said instantly, her voice flat as she read the message over my shoulder. "They're baiting you. They're waiting inside. We'll send a retrieval team for your papers." I shook my head, my mind racing, sorting through the panic to find the logic. No, a retrieval team won't work. Look at the photo. The door isn't kicked in, the lock isn't broken, they picked it, they're clean, they're professionals. But they want me to know they were there. They're pulling the line, not setting the hook. They're waiting to see if I'll run. "Then run," Arya said. "We'll get you out of the city." "My stepmother's files," I said, my voice tight. "Her medical binder. It's everything, her entire history. Her dialysis schedule, her transplant list status. Without that specific binder, she's just a name on a waiting list. Easily lost. I can't let them have that. And they won't be looking for it. They're looking for money. Or Rook information. They'll toss it aside." I looked at Cassian. "This is my intuition. You trusted it for Project Viridian. Trust it now. I have to go in. Alone. I still look the part. You don't." Cassian studied me, his gaze weighing the risk against the reward. He was a general, and I was a new, untested soldier asking to walk into a minefield. Arya. "You and I will take the overwatch positions, north and south alleyways. Elodie." He fixed me with that intense, steel-gray stare. "You go in, you get the binder, you are out in 2 minutes. 2, if you're not out, we're coming in." My building looked pathetic in the harsh gray morning light. The corrugated tin roof on the neighboring bodega was slick with grime, and the whole block smelled of damp plaster and old garbage. It was a world away from the cold, clean power of Silo 19. "Earpiece," Arya ordered, handing me a tiny, flesh-colored bud. "We hear what you hear. We see the exits. You're clear to enter. Go." The lobby was empty. The stairwell was dim, and my footsteps on the worn linoleum steps sounded like gunshots in the silence. The building was holding its breath. I reached my floor, the hallway stretching out under a single flickering fluorescent light. I put my key in the lock. It turned smoothly. They hadn't even bothered to break it. The apartment was a hurricane. They had torn it apart. My sofa cushions were slashed, the stuffing pulled out. My single mattress was flipped over, the frame cracked. The few clothes I owned were thrown from the closet, my kitchen drawers emptied onto the floor. It was a violation that left me feeling cold and hollow. They had searched for something Rook money. I guessed information. They had found nothing but the meager existence of a waitress. Then I saw it. On the small kitchen table, sitting alone amid the chaos, was my blue 3-ring binder, the one with the sticker on the spine. Maria Hart, Medical. It was untouched, pristine. They hadn't tossed it aside. They had left it. I walked toward it, my blood turning to ice. I opened the cover. A single page was dog-eared, the one with Maria's dialysis schedule and the notes on her transplant vulnerability. This wasn't a search. It was a message. It was a calculation of my weakest point. They knew exactly what mattered to me, and they knew it was worthless to anyone else. They were telling me they could touch her whenever they wanted. I grabbed the binder, clutching it to my chest so hard the rings dug into my skin. I had to get out. I turned to leave, and I caught it. Not a sound, but a flicker of movement, a reflection in the dark, greasy glass of my microwave oven. A man, standing in the window of the tenement across the alley. He was partially hidden by a curtain, but I could see the glint of binoculars. A spotter. He was looking right at me. He lowered the binoculars and lifted a phone to his mouth. I didn't scream. I didn't freeze. The training, the adrenaline, the pure, cold rage, it all clicked into place. "Arya, I'm compromised," I hissed into the earpiece. "Back alley spotter. He's on the phone. They're moving." As if on cue, heavy footsteps thundered in the hallway outside my apartment. They were coming for the door. I slammed the deadbolt, knowing it wouldn't hold. My eyes darted around the ruined room. Chair, cleaning spray, fire escape. The doorknob rattled, then a heavy shoulder slammed against the wood. The frame splintered. I jammed my cheap kitchen chair under the doorknob. It wouldn't hold them, but it would buy me seconds. I grabbed the half-full bottle of generic brand all-purpose cleaner from under the sink. Bleach and ammonia, a potent combination. The door slammed again, the wood cracking, the chair skittered. I ran for the fire escape window, painted shut. Of course it was. I yanked, but it wouldn't budge. The door burst open, the chair flying across the room in a spray of shattered wood. A large man in a black raincoat filled the doorway. He grinned when he saw me. Trapped. He lunged. I didn't hesitate. I raised the bottle and squeezed the trigger, fanning a high-pressure mist of chemical cleaner directly into his face and eyes. He howled, a strangled, wet sound, his hands flying to his face. He staggered backward, blinded and choking. My eyes I can't see. I didn't wait. I kicked the back of his knee as hard as I could. His leg buckled, and he went down. I was past him, vaulting over his prone body and into the hallway. "Roof!" I yelled into the mic. "I'm going to the roof!" I sprinted for the metal ladder at the end of the hall, the one marked Roof Access. I slammed my shoulder against the bar and burst out into the damp, gray morning. The roof was a flat expanse of bubbling tar and old ventilation ducts. A light drizzle had started again, making the surface slick. And he was there, the spotter. He was coming up the iron ladder from the alley, faster than I expected. He saw me and his radio crackled. "The bait is on the roof. She's on the roof." He was between me and the only other access point. He pulled a weapon, not a baton, a gun, tucked in a shoulder holster. He was reaching for it, his eyes cold. "Aria Roof, north side, he's armed." "Engaging," her voice replied, impossibly calm. He lunged, trying to cut me off, his hand fumbling for his weapon. I remembered the knife, Aria's knife. It was in my pocket. I snapped it open, the click of the blade sharp in the damp air. He swung at me, a wild, backhanded slap to clear me out of the way. I ducked, the motion sloppy, and my foot hit a patch of standing rainwater. I was falling, but I used it. I let my weight go, sliding on the wet tar, just like the motorcycle. I went under his guard, inside his reach. His eyes widened in surprise. He was still reaching for his gun. My hand, holding the knife, came up. I didn't aim for him. I aimed for the leather strap of his shoulder holster. I sliced up hard. The knife was sharp. The leather parted with a sound like a tearing sigh. The holster, with the gun still in it, sagged, dangling uselessly at his side. He stared at his broken rig, his brain unable to process the shift. He had a gun, but he couldn't get to it. That 1 second of confusion was all it took. A shadow descended from the roofline of the next building. It wasn't Aria. It was Cassian. He must have come up the main fire escape. He landed behind the spotter with barely a sound. It wasn't a fight. It was an ending. Cassian's arm locked around the man's throat. A knee drove into his spine. The man went down, face first onto the tar, a choked gasp escaping him. Aria appeared in the doorway from the hall, her weapon up, covering us. It was over in 3 seconds. Cassian's knee was planted firmly in the center of the man's back. "Nightingale," he demanded, his voice a low, cold vibration. "The name. Who is it?" The man spat blood and tar. "Go to hell, Rook!" Cassian applied pressure, a pained gurgle. "I can end you here and now, and the rain will wash you into the gutter. The name." "I don't know," the man shrieked, his bravado shattering. "I swear I'm just a spotter. I get orders, a meeting. That's all I know, a meeting." "Where?" "Santero Pier Midnight. He's supposed to meet a driver. That's all, they just call him Nightingale." Cassian looked at Aria. She nodded. That was enough. We were gone, down the ladder, into the alley, and into a dark sedan I hadn't even seen before. The adrenaline crash hit me like a physical blow. I was shaking, clutching the medical binder to my chest. My clothes were soaked, and there was a smear of plaster dust and grime on my cheek from the hallway wall. The car was silent, just the hum of the engine and the swish of the wipers. Cassian sat beside me, his own breathing still heavy. He looked at me, his gaze sweeping over my face, checking for injuries. He reached out, his movements slow, as if not to startle me. His fingers, warm and calloused, brushed my cheek. His thumb gently wiped the dust away. The touch was so tender, so unexpected, it sent a shock straight to my core. "You were brave, Elodie," he said, his voice low, the ice gone. I shook my head. The reality of the last few minutes, the last 24 hours, crashing down. Tears I hadn't known I was holding suddenly stung my eyes. "I wasn't brave," I whispered, my voice thick. I was afraid I was going to be late." He frowned. "Late?" "Maria, her dialysis. It's today. This afternoon I have to get this binder to the clinic." Cassian's hand, which had been hovering near my shoulder, froze. His entire body went utterly still. The tenderness vanished, replaced by that profound, unreadable stillness. He stared at me, really seeing the desperation that lived under my skin, the fear that had been there long before he fell into my diner. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "It's me," he said, his voice all business. "Activate Harbor Mercy. Prime protocol. I need a private ambulance. Full renal support crew. The target is Maria Hart. Yes, I want them at her apartment in 30 minutes. They are to handle all her transport and care from now until I say otherwise. I don't care what it costs. Handle it." He hung up and looked at me. I was stunned into silence. Harbor Mercy Cassian. That's the best private care in the state. I can't pay for that. I can't be indebted to you for that. "This isn't a debt," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "There are no strings attached. You saved my life. I am safeguarding yours. And that includes what you care about." He paused. "This is just gratitude." When we got back to Silo 19, Aria was already at the main console, her face tight. "You were right," she said. And I knew she wasn't talking to Cassian. She was talking to me. On the screen was a personnel file, a man in a port driver's uniform, smiling. Dax Miller, senior logistics driver, 20 years with the lineage. Spotless record. He vanished from his shift 2 hours ago, right after Project Viridian's log was pulled. My hunch, a driver, someone everyone trusts. "He's the messenger," Cassian said, standing over the map. "He's meeting the real Nightingale at Santero Pier." "It's a setup," Aria stated, tapping at the keyboard. "They burned their spotter. They know we're coming." "Of course it is," Cassian agreed, "but it's our trap now, not theirs." He pulled up a digital schematic of the pier. It was an old, sprawling wooden structure, cluttered with fishing shacks and storage units. Santero Pier. It's neutral ground, bad sightlines, lots of cover, only one way in and out by land. I looked at the map. I didn't see schematics. I saw my apartment building. I saw the roof. I saw the way the wind moved. "The wind," I said, pointing to the screen. "It comes off the bay, from the southeast. All these shacks are built to block it, but it creates a wind tunnel here and here. If you need an escape route, you don't go against it, you use it. The sound will be covered by the water and the rigging on the boats. The best place to hide, and the best place to leave, is downwind." I took the stylus from her hand and drew a new path on the digital map, a route that used the blind spots, that followed the flow of the wind, that ended at a small, unassuming service dock. Aria studied the lines I'd drawn. She zoomed in, checked the angles. Finally, she nodded. "It's a solid path, better than mine." I looked up. Cassian wasn't looking at the map, and he was looking at me. It was the same look he'd given me in the GTO, when the poison was leaving his system and he was truly seeing me for the first time. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It wasn't the look a boss gives a new, useful asset. It was something else, something deeper. He was seeing a partner, a comrade, and as his gaze held mine, I knew he was also seeing something infinitely more complicated and far more dangerous than either. Santero Pier was a skeleton picked clean by the night, the gaudy, Daytime tourist trap had transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and secrets, its boards slick with sea spray. Neon signs from the shuttered bait shops and bars electric blue. Venomous purple bled onto the black. Choppy water of the bay, painting the waves in bruises. The air was a thick cocktail of low tide, creosote and fryer oil. It felt like a place where bad things came to fester. My disguise felt like a costume for a play I hadn't rehearsed. The borrowed Bureau of Port Integrity jacket was a size too big, its stiff collar chafing my neck. A fake ID badge, expertly crafted by Aria, was clipped to my pocket, its weight a constant, heavy reminder of the lie I was living. In my hand, I clutched a modified RFID scanner, another of Aria's creations, to a casual glance. I was a bored port technician doing a late-night inventory. In reality, I was a walking, talking nerve ending. "Sparrow, report. What's your status?" Cassian's voice, low and calm, materialized in my earpiece. It was a solid, grounding presence in the swirling anxiety. He and Aria were somewhere above me, hidden in the operator's cabin of a massive cargo crane, a mechanical god watching over the pier, Rook 1 and his watcher. "I'm on the pier, approaching the designated meeting point," I murmured, keeping my head down, my eyes scanning the shadows. No sign of the target. "Stay frosty, Sparrow. They'll be here." The plan was simple, and that's what made it terrifying. We knew Dax was meeting Nightingale's contact here. We knew they thought they were walking into a secret auction for the ghost shipment, Project Viridian. My job was to get close enough to Dax to plant a micro-transmitter, then fade back into the shadows. Simple. I saw him then, Dax Miller. He walked onto the pier not like a man about to commit treason, but like a man heading to punch a time clock. He was unnervingly calm, his hands in his pockets, his gaze sweeping the area with a placid indifference that set my teeth on edge. This wasn't a man afraid of being caught. This was a man who thought he was untouchable. He stopped near a stack of old lobster traps, checking his watch. This was my chance. "Rook 1, I'm making my approach," I whispered. "We see you. Sparrow. Clear path." I took a breath, tucked the scanner under my arm, and started walking, my path set to intersect his. I kept my eyes on a clipboard in my hand, feigning preoccupation. 15 feet, 10, 5. I stumbled, a deliberate, clumsy lurch. My clipboard and scanner clattered to the wooden planks. "Oh, shoot," I muttered, my voice pitched with mild annoyance. As I bent to retrieve my things, I brushed past him, my right shoulder making contact with his back. "Sorry," I said, not looking up. In that half-second of contact, my left hand, the transmitter pinched between my thumb and forefinger, shot out. I pressed the tiny magnetic bug to the underside of his jacket collar, right against the seam. My fingers were numb, but I felt the faint click as it locked onto the metal stay inside the fabric. I gathered my things and scurried away, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I didn't look back. I ducked behind a row of corroded fuel drums, my back pressed against the cold, rusted metal. "The package is delivered," I breathed. "Sparrow is nested." "Good work." Cassian's voice was a low rumble of approval. "Now we listen." The audio from the bug crackled to life in my ear. I could hear the lapping of the water, the distant cry of a gull. Then, Dax's phone rang. He answered, "Yeah." A woman's voice responded. It was crisp, cultured, and cold as ice. "The package is secure. Is the asset in place?" "Waiting on your word," Dax replied, his voice betraying nothing. "Good. The new route is confirmed. Abort the Viridian pickup. The real show is at the Southern Crystal Yacht Club. You have your delivery instructions. Don't be late, Dax." "Yes, ma'am. Understood. Miss Ravello." The line went dead. Isobel Ravello. The name hit me like a physical blow. Not some shadowy middleman. The head of their entire operation. The strategist. The one they called the Queen of the Port. And Dax wasn't Nightingale. He was just a pawn, a messenger boy. My mission was done. I should have pulled back, but something was wrong. Dax wasn't moving towards the pier entrance. He was walking deeper in, toward a block of refrigerated containers at the far end, and I could hear something, a low, persistent hum, barely audible over the wind. Rook 1, target is on the move. I reported, he's heading for the reefer units. Something's not right. The Viridian container was supposed to be dry goods. Hold your position, Sparrow, Cashin commanded. But my intuition, the same gut feeling that had screamed at me in my apartment, was screaming now. I started moving, slipping from shadow to shadow, keeping Dax in sight. He stopped at a plain white container, the source of the humming. He didn't open it. He just rapped twice on the door, then turned and walked away, heading back towards the parking lot. I waited until he was gone. The container sat there, humming softly, a silent, white enigma. Cassian, I have to look, I whispered. Negative. Elodie, it's too risky. Get out of there. I'm already here. Before he could argue, I was at the container door. It wasn't locked. I pulled the heavy lever and the door swung open with a hiss of pressurized air. The air that rolled out was cold and sterile, smelling sharply of ammonia and other chemicals I couldn't place. It wasn't a cargo hold. It was a laboratory. Steel tables were bolted to the floor, lined with beakers, glass tubing, and centrifuges. A sophisticated ventilation system was the source of the hum. This was a mobile, state-of-the-art poison lab. They weren't here to pick up a ghost shipment. They were here to drop off a real weapon. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking. I switched to the video camera and sent the live feed through the secure channel Arya had set up. The silence in my earpiece stretched for 3 full seconds. Then Cassian's voice came, and it was a barely leashed snarl. They were going to move this into one of our warehouses. Frame me. Frame the entire lineage. They weren't just going for an assassination. They're trying to start a war and make me look like the aggressor for some fake newspaper story. Suddenly, a soft thwip sounded from above, and the single security camera overlooking this section of the pier sparked and went dark. Camera is blind, Arya's voice cut in. Sharp and efficient. You have 60 seconds. Sparrow, what's your play? My mind was racing. A trap. A frame-up. I looked at the lab container, then at the identical, dormant one next to it. I saw a dark sedan parked in the shadows near the pier entrance, Ravello's support team. I'm swapping the bait, I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. I ran to the lab container, my fingers fumbling with the large magnetic shipping placard on its side. It was heavy, but it came off. I slapped it onto the side of the empty container next to it. I then took the empty container's placard and put it on the lab. It was a simple switch, but in the port's complex logistics system, it was everything. The lab was now officially listed as empty, and the empty box was now officially a high-priority chemical shipment. I wasn't done. I pulled the tiny coin-sized GPS tracker from my pocket and sprinted for the dark sedan. My heart was in my throat. I dropped to my knees, sliding on the wet ground, and slapped the tracker onto the car's frame, just behind the rear wheel. Done, I gasped, scrambling back to the cover of the fuel drums. I watched as Dax got into his own car and drove away. A few minutes later, the dark sedan followed. I was tracking them. We were tracking them. The trail led away from the industrial grime of the port and toward the glittering towers of Brickell. The sedan pulled into the valet lane of a ridiculously opulent building on the waterfront, the Southern Crystal Yacht Club. I directed my own nondescript car into a public garage across the street and watched. There was no way to get in. Sparrow, pull back, Cassian ordered. You've done enough. No, I said, watching the club's entrance. I have to see her. I got out of the car, pulling off the BPI jacket and stuffing it under the seat, underneath. I was still in my black waitress pants and a plain gray t-shirt. I looked like 1,000 other service workers in the city. I walked across the street, straight to the club's service entrance. A cook was outside, smoking a cigarette. Excuse me, I said, my voice full of weary frustration. I'm looking for the catering office. I think I left my phone in the prep kitchen. He grunted, pointing with his chin. Down the hall, to the left. I was in... The halls were a maze of stainless steel and bustling staff. I followed the signs for the main lounge, my heart pounding. I just needed one look. I found a door marked VIP access. I pushed it open a crack, peering through. The lounge was all dark wood and crushed velvet, and sitting in a high-backed chair, a glass of champagne in her hand, was a woman. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with raven black hair pulled back in a severe chignon and a dress the color of blood. Her smile was a perfect painted slash of red, but it didn't touch her cold, calculating eyes. And around her neck, catching the light, was a delicate, exquisitely crafted silver pendant. A nightingale in mid-song. It was her. Isabel Ravello was Nightingale. As I stared, frozen, my earpiece crackled. It was Cassian. His voice was strained, different, tense. "Sparrow, I just received a message. Encrypted. It's from her." A pause. I held my breath. "It says, 'Don't trust the waitress. Rook, she's playing a double game.'" Through the crack in the door, I saw Isabel glance at her phone, then lift her champagne glass in a silent, mocking toast to no one. The world went silent. I felt like I was miles away. Looking down a long tunnel, I could feel Cassian's eyes on me. Even from a mile away in his crane, I could feel his doubt, a poison far more potent than digitalis, seeping through our connection. Every move I'd made, every risk I'd taken, could be reinterpreted as a betrayal. I had led them right to her. It looked like a setup. I waited for the accusation, for the cold command to stand down, for the trust between us to shatter like glass. Instead, after a silence that stretched for an eternity, his voice came back, the tension gone, replaced by a steely resolve. "I see her. Sparrow, we have our queen." He took a breath. "Hold your position. The game just changed, and I'm still betting on you. We didn't speak on the drive from the yacht club." The silence in the car was a different kind than before. It wasn't empty. It was full, charged with the image of Isabel Ravello and the chilling echo of her message. Cassian's trust in me was a fragile, priceless thing held between us, and her words were a direct attempt to smash it. The rain started again, a soft, insistent drumming that matched the questions hammering in my own mind. Aria directed us to a place nestled in a quiet, old-money corner of Coral Gables. It wasn't a fortress like the silo. It was a house. Casa de Lirio, she'd called it. The House of the Lily. It was a Spanish-style home, hidden behind a high, vine-covered wall. The moment we stepped out of the car, the air was heavy with the sweet, intoxicating scent of night-blooming jasmine. It felt a world away from the violence and concrete of the port. Inside, it was cool and quiet, the floors tiled and worn smooth with age. Aria did a security sweep, her movements economical and precise, before giving us a curt nod. "The perimeter is clean. I'll be monitoring from the guest house. Get some rest. You both look like ghosts." She left, and the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind her, leaving Cassian and me alone in the cavernous living room. And then, as if on cue, the lights flickered twice and died. The hum of the air conditioning ceased, plunging the house into a sudden, profound silence, broken only by the sound of the rain on the terracotta roof tiles. "Of course," Cassian muttered, his voice a dark shape in the gloom. I saw the flicker of his lighter, then the warm, dancing glow of a candle. He found others on the mantelpiece, and soon the room was filled with a soft, unsteady golden light that made the shadows deep and mysterious. The adrenaline from the pier, from the yacht club, from Isabel's face, finally began to recede, leaving a bone-deep chill in its wake. I started to shiver, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was the crash. The reaction to a day that had pushed me so far past my limits I couldn't even see them anymore. Cassian turned from lighting the last candle and saw me. Oh, he didn't say anything. He walked to a large wooden chest, pulled out a thick, heavy wool blanket, and came to me. He draped it over my shoulders, his hands lingering there for a moment longer than necessary. His touch was firm, steadying, through the wool. I could feel the warmth of his skin. Through his hands, I'm sure he could feel the frantic, panicked thrumming of my heart. We stood there for a long moment, the unsaid things hanging in the warm, flickering air between us. His trust, her lie, my fear, his exhaustion. The words were too complicated, too dangerous. So we just looked at each other, our eyes doing the talking in the language of the candle flame. His gaze was intense, searching, as if trying to read the truth of the last few hours in my face. It was then that I saw it, a dark, ugly bruise blooming on the side of his neck, just below his jaw. It was mottled purple and blue, a violent thumbprint left by the poison's assault on his body, or perhaps from the struggle to escape the gala. Without thinking, my hand came up, my fingers gently tracing the edge of the discoloration. "Does it hurt?" I whispered. A sharp, involuntary wince tightened his jaw. He'd been hiding it, ignoring it. Another piece of damage in a day full of it. He didn't answer, but his hand closed around my wrist. It wasn't a gesture of control, but of connection. He gently pulled my hand away from his neck and led me, without a word, through the living room and into a large, dark kitchen. He found another candle, lighting it and placing it on the edge of a deep farmhouse sink. He turned on the tap, and the sound of running water was loud in the quiet house. He reached for a clean dish towel. "Let me," I said softly, taking the towel from his hand. I soaked a corner of it in the cool water, my movements slow, deliberate. I turned back to him. We were standing so close in the small pool of candlelight that I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the network of fine lines around his eyes from exhaustion and stress. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, and I could smell the clean, sharp scent of his skin beneath the lingering salt and wind. Our breaths mingled in the small space between us. I hesitated, the damp cloth in my hand. This was a line, a boundary. He was my protector, my reluctant partner in this chaos. I was the waitress who had saved his life. But this felt different. This was personal. This was intimate. He must have read the conflict in my eyes. His voice was a low, rough whisper that seemed to touch my skin. "I will only touch you if you want me to, Elodie." The choice was mine. The power, in this small, quiet moment, was all mine. He was the head of the Rook lineage, a man who commanded a city, but he was letting a broke waitress from Little Havana command this. I took a slow, deep breath, the scent of jasmine and rain filling my lungs, and I nodded, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. I raised the cloth to his neck, my touch as gentle as I could make it. He flinched slightly as the coolness met his bruised skin, but he didn't pull away. He stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on mine, his entire body a study in rigid control. I cleaned the area carefully, my fingers brushing against the strong column of his throat, feeling the steady, powerful pulse beneath the skin, the same pulse I had felt when it was weak and failing. When I finished, I didn't step back. My hand, the one not holding the cloth, came up. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, then pressed my palm flat against the center of his chest, right over his heart. I felt its strong, steady rhythm against my skin. A human beat, beneath all the layers of power and danger. A life I had held in my hands. That was all it took. The rigid control in his body shattered. His hand came up to cover mine, his fingers lacing through my own, pressing my hand tighter against him. His other hand moved to my waist, gently, tentatively, drawing me closer until the space between us disappeared entirely. He lowered his head, and I lifted mine. The kiss was not what I expected. It wasn't rough or demanding or possessive. It was slow. It was deep. It was devastatingly honest. It was a question and an answer, a release of all the tension, all the fear, all the unspoken things that had been arcing between us since he'd stumbled into my diner. His lips were warm and firm, moving against mine with a searching tenderness that made my knees weak. It tasted of coffee and the clean night air, and a sorrow so profound it stole my breath. This wasn't the kiss of a Mafia boss staking a claim. It was the kiss of a man who had been to the edge of death and back. A man who was finding a reason to stay. I wrapped my arms around his neck, my fingers tangling in the thick hair at his nape. I kissed him back with all the fear and confusion, and a startling, fierce surge of protectiveness in this chaotic, violent world we'd been thrown into. This felt real. This felt true. It was a silent promise, passed between our lips, a vow to shield each other, to be an anchor in the storm. It wasn't about ownership, it was about partnership. My back was against the cool tile of the kitchen counter, his body a warm, solid wall in front of me. The candlelight flickered, the rain drummed on the roof, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only this connection, this truth. A harsh, electronic buzz cut through the spell. We broke apart, both of us breathing heavily, our eyes wide in the candlelight. The sound came again. It was his phone, a satellite phone lying on the counter. He snatched it up, his face instantly transforming. The softness, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by the hard, sharp lines of the commander. He answered, "Aria." He listened, his body going tense. When he snapped, a pause, an anonymous tip. Of course, she's accelerating the timeline. He looked at me, his eyes dark with a new urgency. Where is she moving it? He listened again, then swore a low, vicious curse. Understood. We're on our way. He ended the call, the silence in the kitchen suddenly feeling cold and dangerous again. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That was Aria," he said, his voice clipped and all business. "The BPI is planning a surprise inspection of the port tomorrow morning." Isabel got an anonymous tip. "Of course. She's moving the lab. Tonight. Now." I pulled away from the counter, the warmth of his body already a fading memory. The real world had just crashed back in. She's trying to get it off the board before we can expose it. Exactly. He stepped toward me, but stopped, keeping a deliberate distance. He raised a hand and gently touched my face, his thumb brushing my lower lip. "We're back in the game. Elodie." I met his gaze, my mind already shifting, calculating. The soft, pliant woman who had been in his arms was gone, replaced by the strategist he was starting to rely on. "Good," I said, "because we know where she's going." We stood there, the remnants of that earth-shattering kiss still lingering in the air. A new, unspoken understanding between us. "This," he said, his voice low and serious, gesturing to the space between us. "Can't make us reckless. We have to be smart. We have to be clear." "I know," I agreed, my own resolve hardening. "The mission comes first. We keep each other sharp, not distracted." He nodded, a flicker of something respect in his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled something out. He took my wrist and fastened a thin, silver bracelet around it. It was elegant, simple, except for a single, tiny charm. A raven, wings spread in flight, carved from a piece of polished black onyx. "This isn't a gift, Elodie," he said, his voice low as he clasped it shut. "It's a tool. See this wing?" He touched the tip of the raven's left wing. "Press it for 1 second. It sends a silent signal on a closed channel, directly to me. No matter where I am, I will be there in 7 seconds. It's a promise." I looked at the tiny, perfect raven on my wrist. It wasn't a chain. It was a lifeline. Just then, the lights in the kitchen flickered back on. The refrigerator hummed to life. The candlelight was instantly washed out by the harsh, sterile glare of the overhead fluorescent bulb. The spell was broken. The intimacy of the darkness was gone. We stood there, blinking in the sudden brightness, the moment of vulnerability over. But something had fundamentally changed. We were no longer just a boss and his unlikely asset. We were partners, bound by a secret shared in the dark. And as we turned to face the renewed threat from Isabel Ravello, We were stronger for it. The kiss in the candlelit kitchen felt like it had happened a lifetime ago. Back at Silo 19, the mood was a cold, hard slap of reality. The soft, golden glow of the Casa de Lirio was replaced by the harsh, blue-white light of tactical displays. The scent of jasmine was gone, replaced by the sterile hum of servers and the bitter tang of brewing coffee. The mission was back, and it was moving faster than we were. Aria had a source deep inside the city's media landscape. The news was bad. The BPI has scheduled a press conference for 10 a.m. tomorrow, she announced, her voice clipped, her eyes glued to a screen. The leak says they've uncovered a rogue chemical trafficking ring operating out of the port of Miami. They're going to pin the attempt on you, Cassian. They'll paint you as a reckless monster who got a taste of his own medicine. Isobel's endgame, Cassian said, his voice a low growl. He was pacing in front of the main map, a caged predator. She poisons me, fails, and then uses the BPI to publicly execute my reputation. She doesn't have to kill me if the city believes I'm a villain. It was a perfect trap. Isabel's mobile lab, the one we'd tracked, would be long gone. But she would have planted something, some residue, some piece of fabricated evidence in one of Cassian's legitimate warehouses. When the BPI cameras went live, they would find exactly what Isabel wanted them to find. So we stopped them. Cassian decided. We hit the transport convoy tonight. We destroy the lab before she can move it. No, I said, the word coming out before I'd fully formed the thought. Both of them turned to look at me. That's what she expects. A violent reaction. It plays right into her narrative of you being a reckless monster. We don't stop her plan. We redirect it. I walked to the main map, my mind racing. Isabel thinks she's leading the BPI to a specific location to find her planted evidence. But she doesn't know we were on the pier. She doesn't know we swapped the placards on those containers. I pointed to the glowing red dot that represented the real lab, now disguised as an empty box. We don't stop the press conference. We feed it. We leak the manifests, the real ones, showing a hazardous chemical shipment at the pier. We lead the BPI and their news cameras right to the container we want them to find, the one with her lab inside. Aria's eyes narrowed, processing the strategy, a pivot. We use her own weapon, the media, against her. The BPI goes in expecting to find your dirt, and instead they find her entire poison operation, live on camera. But they'll destroy the evidence, Cassian countered. The compromised agents will claim it's a mistake, a clerical error, and bury it before it can be processed. Not if the evidence is already preserved, Aria said, a slow, dangerous smile touching her lips for the first time. She tapped her keyboard, bringing up a complex flow chart. The Port Authority has a new digital chain of custody system, the seal board. Every high-priority container is digitally sealed, with an encrypted timestamp and manifest log. It's supposed to be unhackable. Supposed to be, I asked. I helped design the back end, Aria said flatly. I'm going to seal that container. Right now, with its true manifest, when the BPI opens it, they will also be breaking a federal digital seal, an act that is automatically logged and flagged with Homeland Security. They can't bury it. The evidence will be legally pristine before they even lay eyes on it. The plan was audacious. It was brilliant. It was also a declaration of all-out war. Cassian knew it. He activated a secure video line and the faces of 5 other people. The core council of the Rook lineage appeared on a side screen. He laid out the situation, his voice calm and authoritative. He didn't mention me. He presented the plan as his own. One of the faces, a young, sharp-suited lawyer named Arlen, immediately objected. This is insane. Cassian, we're inviting the feds into our house. The answer here is force. We find Isabel Ravello. We remove her from the board, permanently. We send a message that the lineage does not get pushed. And that's exactly what she wants. Arlen, I said, stepping into the camera's view. The faces on the screen registered surprise, and in Arlen's case, open disdain. And who is this, he sneered, the new help? This is Sparrow, Cassian said, his voice leaving no room for argument. She has the floor. I took a breath. Isabel isn't stupid. She's not a street brawler, she's a strategist. She knows you have more muscle. She's not trying to win a gunfight. She's trying to win a public relations war. If you react with violence, you prove her right. You become the villain she's painting you as. But if you react with information, with truth, you expose her as a liar and a poisoner in front of the entire city. You don't just beat her. You discredit her entire operation. You let the system she bought and paid for be the very thing that destroys her. The room went silent. The council members looked at each other, then back at me. Arlen opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. I hadn't used threats or jargon, I just used logic. Cassian ended the call. The council had agreed. The pivot was a go. My phone buzzed. Another text from an unknown number. But this one was different. It wasn't a threat. It was a string of code, a set of coordinates, and 2 words. Brickell Causeway, 3 a.m. Sparrow alone. I showed it to Cassian. His face hardened. It's a trap. She knows your call sign. She's trying to separate you from us. No, I said, shaking my head. Isabel already sent her message. The one calling me a double agent. This isn't her style. This is something else. This is Nightingale, the real one. I'm going with you, he stated. If it's a trap, the net closes the second they see you, Arya countered, agreeing with my unspoken thought. They won't make a move on her if she's with the head of the Rook lineage. She's not going alone, Cassian insisted, his voice tight with a protective instinct that went beyond strategy. I have to, I said, meeting his gaze. I tapped the raven bracelet on my wrist. I won't be alone. You promised. 3 a.m. Under the Brickell Causeway was a concrete purgatory. The relentless hum of traffic overhead was a constant. Oppressive weight. The air was thick with exhaust fumes and the damp, salty smell of the bay. Shadows stretched and danced, turning discarded newspapers into lurking figures. I stood by a support column, my hands shoved in the pockets of Cassian's jacket, which I hadn't taken off. I felt exposed, hunted. A figure detached itself from the deeper shadows near the water. It wasn't a hulking enforcer or a sleek assassin. It was a woman, middle-aged, with tired lines around her eyes and graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a simple, professional blouse and slacks, and she was clutching her handbag like a shield. She looked like someone's mother. She looked like an accountant. She stopped about 10 feet away from me. You're the one they call Sparrow. Her voice was thin, reedy, and trembling with fear. I am, I said, She reached up, her fingers fumbling at her neck, and pulled out a delicate silver chain from beneath her collar. Dangling from it was a small, intricately carved pendant, a nightingale. I am Nightingale, she whispered, and her eyes filled with tears. My name is Margot Wynne. I've been a bookkeeper for the Rook lineage for 15 years. My mind reeled. This wasn't Isabel. This wasn't even an enemy. My son, she said, her voice cracking. He's a good boy, but he got in over his head. Gambling debts to the Ravellos. They were going to kill him. They said the only way to pay it off was with information. You gave them the gala information, I stated, the pieces falling into place. She nodded, shamefaced. They forced me, but I never wanted Cassian hurt. I tried to warn him. I sent anonymous messages, but they must have been intercepted. When I heard what happened, I knew I couldn't live with it. Isabel, she's a monster. She took my call sign, my signature. She was going to frame me for all of it. She took a hesitant step closer, extending her handbag. I can't fix what I did, but I can give you this. It's everything. Copies of the payments from Ravello to the BPI commissioner, encrypted plans for the Digitalis production, everything you need to destroy them. She unzipped the bag and held out a small, silver thumb drive. As my fingers closed around the cool metal of the drive, I heard the scuff of a shoe on loose gravel behind me. Margot, get down, I yelled. I shoved her hard, sending her stumbling behind the massive concrete pillar. At the same time, 2 men emerged from the darkness, their movements swift and silent, weapons raised, Ravello's cleanup crew. I didn't have time to think. I dropped, pulled Pulling the pistol Arya had given me from the waistband at the small of my back, I fired twice, not aiming to hit, but to force them to take cover. The explosions were deafening in the enclosed space. Margot screamed. I grabbed her arm, pulling her deeper into the shadows. Stay with me. A shot pinged off the concrete inches from my head, spraying us with dust. I pressed my thumb down on the raven's wing on my bracelet. 1 second. I peered around the pillar. They were advancing, using the support columns for cover. I was outgunned. I only had 1 clip. I took a breath, squeezed the trigger. I remembered Cassian's voice. Breathe. Squeeze. The shot was steady. It hit the pillar near one of the gunmen, forcing him back. 3 seconds. Margot was sobbing beside me, a litany of I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. It's okay, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. Just stay down. 5 seconds. A shadow detached itself from the top of the causeway above. Not a flicker, just a sudden, impossible presence. 6 seconds. Cassian landed behind them as silently as a bird of prey. It was the same deadly efficiency I'd seen on the roof, but this time it was doubled. Arya dropped from the other side, a mirror image of lethal grace. It was over before the gunmen even knew they were in a fight. 2 silent, brutal takedowns. Then, nothing but the hum of the traffic and Margot's ragged breathing. 7 seconds. Cassian was in front of me, his hand on my shoulder, his eyes scanning me for injuries. Are you hurt? We're fine, I said, my voice shaking now that the danger was past. He helped me to my feet, then turned to look at Margot, who was huddled against the pillar, the thumb drive still clutched in her hand. His face was unreadable, a mask of cold authority. He could have ordered her death right there. It would have been justified. It would have been Mafia justice. But he didn't. Margot, he said, his voice quiet but firm, you betrayed my family. You put my life at risk. She flinched, expecting the final judgment. But you came here tonight, he continued. You tried to make it right. That has value. He took the thumb drive from her trembling hand. I'm going to give you a choice. You can disappear into our custody, and we will handle your son's debt. Or you can help us. You can be the one who hands this evidence to the honest agents at the BPI. You can be the one who testifies against the men Ravello bought. You can burn their whole corrupt system down from the inside. Margot stared at him, her tear-filled eyes wide with disbelief, and then a dawning, desperate hope. I watched him, and I finally understood. He wasn't just a man of violence. He wasn't just a protector. He was a master of strategy, and his most powerful weapon wasn't a gun or an army of soldiers. It was his calculated understanding of human nature. He knew that a terrified woman seeking redemption would be a far more powerful and believable witness against his enemies than a dead traitor would be. He wasn't just offering mercy, he was weaponizing it. And in that moment, seeing the hope on Margot's face, I realized that was a kind of power I could not only respect, but truly believe in. Our counterplan, which had seemed so brilliant in the silo, collapsed like a house of cards. The 10 BMM press conference was a masterclass in manipulation, and I had been Isabel's star pupil. It started with the BPI. The corrupt agents, following Isabel's original script, raided one of Cassian's legitimate warehouses with cameras rolling. They found nothing, just as she'd planned. Then, the honest BPI agents, acting on Margot's evidence, stormed the container yard. They found the container I had so cleverly relabeled, and it, too, was empty. Arya's digital seal was worthless. The evidence was gone. Isabel had moved the lab, not just to a new location, but completely off the grid, hours before Margot even spoke to me. She had anticipated every move, including her own mole's betrayal. She had played us all. The BPI looked like incompetent fools, chasing ghosts all over the port. Margot's testimony was now just the ramblings of a discredited bookkeeper, her evidence mysteriously lost in the bureaucratic shuffle. Then, Isabel played her second card. The Sunline Gazette, a local tabloid with a circulation of 500,000, hit the streets just before lunch. My face was on the cover. It was a grainy, unflattering security still from La Palmera. Beside it was a long lens shot of Cassian, looking dark and powerful. The headline screamed, "Porting Chaos Rook's new lover, a fugitive con artist." The story was a masterpiece of fabrication. It painted me as a disgruntled, failed EMT student who had been seduced by Cassian Rook. It claimed I had used my superficial medical knowledge to gain his trust, and then, wearing a fake BPI uniform, I had fed the Port Authority a web of false intelligence. The goal, the paper claimed, was to create a diversion so the Rook lineage could move illicit materials, while the BPI chased its tail. Isobel had taken my own strategy, the pivot, and turned it against me. I wasn't a whistleblower. I was a smokescreen. My name, Elodie Hart, was now linked to a federal investigation. The Port Police, the BPI's enforcement arm, had a warrant out for my arrest. I was a fugitive. "We're burned," Arya said, her voice a flat line. "We were back in the silo, but it no longer felt safe. This place is compromised. We all are. Elodie is the primary target. They'll use her to bring you down. Cassian." "Then we disappear," Cassian said, his face carved from granite. He was already moving, shedding his suit jacket, pulling on a simple, dark hoodie, not as rooks, as ghosts. He led me out through a subterranean tunnel that emptied into a storm drain, and then up into the heart of Miami's organized chaos, Wynwood. The sun was bleeding into the horizon, and the night market was just coming alive. The sheer sensory overload was a shield. The air throbbed with the bass of a dozen different reggaeton songs, and the walls were alive, covered in vibrant 10-foot-tall murals of mythical creatures and psychedelic patterns. The smells of grilling meat, spray paint, and sweet churros clashed in the humid air. We moved with the crowd, 2 more anonymous faces in the throng. Cassian's hand was a firm, constant pressure on the small of my back, guiding me, propelling me forward. We were just another couple, lost in the electric Friday night. Until we weren't. "Miss Hartport Police, stop right there." The shout cut through the music. 2 uniformed officers, their faces hard and determined, were pushing through the crowd, 20 yards behind us. They weren't BPI. These were the real, armed police. "Run," Cassian said. We plunged into an alley, the vibrant colors of the market instantly giving way to concrete, dumpsters, and the sour smell of garbage. We scrambled up a rusty fire escape, our feet clanging on the metal. The shouts of the officers echoed below us. We burst onto a flat, gravel-strewn roof. The Miami skyline glittered around us, a cold, beautiful audience to our desperation. The officers were right behind us, their voices closer. "This way," Cassian yelled, pulling me toward the edge of the building. We ran, leaping over massive air conditioning ducts and electrical conduits. The roof ended in a sheer, black drop, an alley, 3 stories below. The next building was a chasm away 15, maybe 20 feet of empty, nighttime air. Cassian didn't even slow down. "On my mark. Elodie. Run and jump. Don't think." "I can't." I skidded to a stop, my sneakers slipping on the gravel. The gap was terrifying, a mouth waiting to swallow me. "Yes, you can." He was already moving. He took 3 long strides and launched himself into the darkness. He hit the opposite parapet hard, rolling with the impact, and sprang to his feet at the edge, his hand outstretched. "Now, Elodie, I have you jump." The officers were on the roof, fanning out. I had no choice. I took a deep breath, my eyes locked on his, and I ran. I pushed off the ledge with every ounce of strength I had, my body flying through the humid air. I wasn't going to make it. My feet hit the brick wall a foot below the ledge. I was falling. A hand clamped around my wrist like a steel trap. Cassian. His grip was absolute, agonizingly tight, stopping my fall instantly. I slammed into the wall, the air exploding from my lungs, my legs dangling over the blackness. He didn't waver. With a low, animalistic grunt, he hauled me upward, his biceps straining, and dragged me over the ledge. I collapsed onto the roof, gasping, my entire body shaking. His hand was still locked on my wrist, his fingers a brand of heat and strength. We didn't have time to breathe. We were up and moving, down another ladder and into a dark, waiting loading bay. The engine of a white, unmarked, refrigerated truck idled softly. The back doors flew open. Aria? Her face was grim. "Get in, now." The doors slammed shut, plunging us into a vibrating, freezing darkness. The truck lurched into motion. The smell was overwhelming, stale fish and chemical ice. We were surrounded by tall, metal racks filled with bags of crushed ice. The cold so sharp it felt like 1,000 tiny needles on my skin. I was shivering almost immediately, the thin hoodie I'd been given doing nothing to stop the penetrating chill. The truck drove for an eternity, the rattle of the ice bags a constant, maddening drum. Then we stopped. Muffled voices shouted outside, "A checkpoint." I stopped breathing. My heart felt like it was going to stop. We were in a box, a frozen tomb. There was no escape. The cold was unbearable now. My shivering so violent my teeth chattered. I felt Cassian move beside me in the pitch black. He pulled me to him, his arms wrapping around me, pulling my back against his chest. He was a furnace. He tucked my head under his chin, enclosing me in a pocket of shared body heat, his arms a steel barrier against the cold. "Just breathe, Elodie," he whispered, his voice a low vibration against my ear. "I've got you." I sank against him, my panic and the terrible, biting cold momentarily forgotten. All I could feel was the solid, steady beat of his heart against my back and the secure strength of his arms. I managed a shaky, breathless laugh, my voice muffled against his hoodie. "You're always just in time," I whispered. I felt the rumble of a low chuckle in his chest. It's becoming a bad habit, saving each other. The voices outside faded, and the truck lurched forward again. We stayed like that, a silent, huddled knot of warmth in the frozen dark, for another hour. Finally, the truck stopped, the doors opened, and the comparatively warm, salty night air rushed in, feeling like a balm. We weren't at the silo. We were at a deserted shipyard, the skeletal ribs of half-finished boats looming against the moonlit water. Margot Wynne stepped from the shadows of a foreman's shack, her face pale but resolute. "Thank God," she breathed. "I was so worried. I brought the data. All of it." We were in the shack, the single bare bulb overhead casting long shadows. Margot's drive was plugged into Aria's laptop. It wasn't just the BBI payments. It was Isabel's shadow ledger, her network of buyers, her research notes on the Digitalis compound. "She lost her lab," I said, my mind clicking, ignoring the tremor in my hands. "But she still has the formula. She still has a list of buyers. She just needs a new place to cook. She needs capital." "She needs to sell her existing product," Cassian corrected, his eyes on the ledger. "And she needs to find a new supplier or partner." "So we give her one," Aria said, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. "We'll build a ghost market, a dark line auction, invitation only. We leaked that a new, high-volume pharmaceutical broker is in town, looking to corner the market. She won't be able to resist. She won't come herself. She'll send a proxy." Cassian argued. I shook my head, my eyes scanning the psychological profile Margot had included in her notes. "No, she's Nightingale. She has to be the one conducting the orchestra. She's too arrogant to let a deal this big go through a subordinate. She'll come, and I'll be the one to greet her." The auction was set in a massive, cavernous dry dock. It was a cathedral of rust and shadows. A single high-wattage bulb hung over a steel table, creating a small, harsh island of light in a sea of darkness. I was the broker. I wore a simple, dark pantsuit, and my face was hidden behind a smooth, white, featureless mask. My voice was fed through a modulator, making it flat, robotic, and unrecognizable. She came. Right on time, Isabel Ravello, flanked by 3 bodyguards. She was dressed for war, not business, in black tactical gear, her hair in a severe braid. She stopped 20 feet from my table, just outside the circle of light. "You've caused a lot of trouble for a new player," she called out, her voice echoing in the vast space. "Who are you?" "I'm the one with the buyers." My modulated voice replied, "You're the one with the product. Let's discuss terms." She laughed, a cold, sharp sound. She took a step forward, her face entering the light, her eyes, beautiful and dead, raked over me. "I know who you are," she said softly. Her lips curved into that cold, mirthless smile. "You're a very fast waitress. Elodie Hart." My blood turned to ice. Before I could even process the words, the single light bulb overhead exploded in a pop and a shower of glass. Aria had hit the main breaker. We were plunged into a darkness so total it was disorienting. I heard it before I saw it, the thwack of a non-lethal round, the grunt of a man hitting the floor. Aria and Cassian, moving from the darkness. Another thud. A second guard was down. I ripped the mask from my face, my eyes struggling to adjust to the faint moonlight filtering through the high, grime-covered windows. Isobel wasn't running. She was coming for me. She emerged from the shadow, a blade flashing in her hand. I met her attack with the knife Aria had given me, the shing of metal on metal ringing in the huge, empty space. She was fast, but I was fueled by adrenaline and rage. I remembered Cassian's training. I didn't fight her strength. I used her momentum. I parried her lunge, swept her leg, and sent her sprawling to the concrete floor. In a second, I was on top of her, the tip of my blade at her throat. "It's over, Isabel." She was laughing, a breathless, choked, terrifying sound. "It's over," she gasped, looking up at me. "You poor, stupid girl. You think this is the end." With a sudden, violent twist, she slammed her free hand against the ground. A small canister erupted. A thick, suffocating cloud of white smoke poured out, stinging my eyes, clogging my throat. I recoiled, coughing, blinded. By the time the smoke began to clear, she was gone. "Aria status." Cassian's voice was right beside me, his hand on my back, steadying me. "She's gone." Aria's voice echoed from the far end of the dry dock. "She had an exit route, through the drainage tunnels. She's vanished." Something was on the floor where Isabel had been. I bent down and picked it up. It was a single engraved card, like something from an old-world game. On it was a stark, black-and-white drawing of a lighthouse. Cassian took it from my hand, his face grim in the moonlight. "I know this place." I looked up at him, my eyes still watering. "Lighthouse Key," he said, his voice a low, cold growl. "An old, abandoned military battery off the coast. My father always said it was the one place in Miami the ravens wouldn't fly. He said it was cursed." Isobel's mocking laugh echoed in my memory. She wasn't running. She was waiting. She was setting the final board. Lighthouse Key. Even the name was a lie. There was no key, no lock, no safe harbor. It was a shard of limestone and coral off the Miami coast, a place sailors avoided. The local fishermen had another name for it. El Ojo de la Tormenta, the eye of the storm, a place of unnatural, dangerous calm where the worst weather in the Atlantic was born. And it was where Isabel was waiting. The air at the abandoned shipyard was thick with the sense of a coming battle. Cassian's team, a dozen silent, professional figures in dark gear, moved with a quiet efficiency, loading equipment onto a sleek, low-profile interceptor boat. They checked weapons, calibrated comms, and moved like a pack of wolves preparing for a hunt. Cassian was outlining the assault plan with Aria, his finger tracing lines on a digital map of the island. Alpha Team takes the West Beach, Bravo, the North. We converge on the lighthouse. "I'm going with you," I said. Both of them stopped and looked at me. It was Aria who spoke, her voice flat and dismissive, negative. "You're the asset we're protecting. You'll stay here with Margot and a guard detail." "No," I said, my voice shaking slightly but firm. "You don't understand. This isn't just about Cassian anymore." She put my face on the front page of a newspaper. She threatened my stepmother. She's using me as the pivot for this whole war. I looked directly at Cassian, my gaze unwavering. They hung the bait with my name. "Cassian, I have to be the one to cut the line." He studied my face, searching for a hint of fear, of hesitation. He found none. He saw only a cold, hard resolve that had been forged in the fire of the last few days. He gave a single, sharp nod to Arya. "She's with me. Part of the command team." Arya's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. The half hour before we left was a strange, suspended moment in time. The team was ready, waiting for the tide to turn. The frantic energy of preparation had subsided, leaving a heavy, anticipatory silence. Cassian found me on the bow of the boat, staring out at the dark, restless water. The wind was picking up, carrying the smell of salt and the distant metallic tang of rain. He stood beside me, not speaking for a long time. The silence wasn't empty. It was a space for us to breathe before the plunge. "My father was killed on a pier not much different from this one," he said, his voice so low it was almost carried away by the wind. "I was 16. It wasn't a big, dramatic shootout. It was one man, a rival he'd shown mercy to a week earlier. He walked up to my father, who had his back turned, and put a single round in his spine. I was waiting in the car. He looked at the dark water, but I knew he was seeing something else entirely. I learned 2 things that day. Never turn your back, and mercy is a weapon that can be used against you." The confession was a rare, raw piece of his soul, offered up in the darkness. I thought of the mercy he'd shown Margot, the calculated, strategic kindness. He hadn't learned the lesson he thought he had. He had refined it. "The first time I ever saved someone was in my EMT class," I whispered, the memory suddenly vivid. "We were doing a ride-along. There was a call an old homeless man had collapsed in a bus station. Everyone was walking around him, ignoring him. My instructor and I were the first on the scene. He wasn't breathing. I performed CPR for 8 minutes, my arms burning, my knees raw on the dirty floor. I just kept going. And then he took a breath, a ragged, rattling gasp. His eyes opened. I looked at Cassian. In that moment, seeing him breathe again, I didn't feel powerful. I just felt right. Like I had put one small thing back in its proper place in a world that was always breaking. He turned to face me, the wind whipping strands of hair across my face. He reached out and gently tucked them behind my ear. His touch was warm against my cold skin. His world was about taking lives, controlling chaos. Mine was about mending, about putting things back together. We were opposite sides of the same battered, desperate coin. He leaned in, and I met him halfway. The kiss we shared on the bow of that boat was nothing like the first one in the kitchen. That had been a discovery, a spark in the dark. This was a statement. It was slow, sure, and deeply certain. It was a promise made in the face of an uncertain dawn, a silent vow that whatever happened in the eye of the storm, we would face it together. There was no desperation in it, only a profound, heartbreaking certainty. It was the kiss of soldiers before the final charge. When we broke apart, the world had shifted. The decision had been sealed. Arya approached, her face impassive. She handed me a lightweight vest of ballistic armor. It was surprisingly supple. "This will stop a 9mm, but not a rifle round," she said, her voice all business as she tightened the straps. "These are the hand signals for engage, fall back, and target acquired. Memorize them." Margot came next, her eyes full of a fearful hope. She pressed a small, waterproof thumb drive into my hand. "It's a complete copy of the data I gave you," she said, "just in case." The engines of the Interceptor roared to life, a deep, powerful thrum that vibrated through the hull. We pulled away from the shipyard, slicing through the black water, leaving the lights of Miami behind us. Ahead, there was only darkness, and in the distance, a single, rhythmic pulse of light. The lighthouse. It swept across the water like a searchlight, a lonely, vigilant eye. The sky above was a turbulent canvas of bruised purple and black clouds. A new storm was coming. Cassian came to stand beside me at the railing as the boat picked up speed, the sea spray cool on our faces. He pressed something small, cold and heavy into my hand. It was a compact semi-automatic pistol, smaller than the one I'd been training with, but perfectly balanced. He closed my fingers around the grip. His voice was calm, a steady anchor in the rising wind. "You watch my back, Elodie," he said, his steel-gray eyes locking with mine. "I'll watch your heart." We made landfall on a treacherous beach of sharp, black volcanic rock. The island was a place of jagged edges and hostile silence. There was no sand, no gentle slope, just the harsh, unforgiving line where the sea met the stone. The air was heavy, tasting of brine and decay. Arya, moving with a predator's grace, found the tracks immediately. At least 6 of them. Heavy boots. They made landfall less than an hour ago. They're not trying to be quiet. We moved inland, the lighthouse our only landmark, its intermittent beam cutting through the gnarled, salt-stunted trees. The only sounds were the crunch of our boots on the gravelly soil and the distant, mournful cry of seabirds. But I could feel it, the prickle on the back of my neck, the sense of being watched. Then I heard another sound, faint but unmistakable, carried on the wind, the metallic click of a weapon's safety being disengaged. We were in the kill zone. Suddenly, a voice boomed from hidden loudspeakers, amplified and distorted, echoing across the small island. It was Isabel. "Welcome to my island, Rook. I hope you enjoyed the boat ride." We all froze, dropping into defensive positions behind the rocks. "I'll make this simple," her voice continued, laced with a cold, theatrical amusement. "I have something you want. I want something you have. You will walk out onto the central clearing, alone and unarmed, and we can negotiate the transfer of power. Or..." A new sound crackled over the loudspeakers, a low, industrial hum, a sound I knew with a chilling, intimate familiarity, the rhythmic groan of a mobile refrigeration unit's compressor. Or, Isabel's voice purred, "The waitress goes back into the icebox, this time for good. The choice is yours. Cassian, your legacy, or your little stray, tick-tock." My blood ran cold. She had another one, another refrigerated truck, or a container, a frozen tomb, waiting for me. I looked at Cassian, his face a mask of stone, his knuckles white where he gripped his rifle. "She's not giving you a choice between me and your power," I whispered, my voice tight. "She's giving you a choice between being a savior and being a king. She wants you to sacrifice me to prove you're still a ruthless rook, or sacrifice your reputation to prove you're a fool in love. Either way, she wins." A slow, dangerous smile touched Cassian's lips. It was the smile of a predator who had just seen the fatal flaw in his opponent's trap. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a fierce, unwavering light. "She's wrong," he said, his voice a low growl that was just for me. "She thinks I only have 2 moves, but I choose a third way, the one where you choose with me." He clicked his comms. "Arya, you hear that?" "Loud and clear," she responded. "She wants you in the clearing, which means her primary force will be concentrated there, waiting for you." "Exactly," Cassian said. "So you're going to give them a distraction. Take Bravo team, hit them hard from the west, draw their fire, make them think I'm trying a flanking maneuver." "And you," Arya asked. "Sparrow and I are going straight down the middle," he said. He pointed toward a dark, overgrown drainage ditch that snaked through the center of the island, a muddy, shadowed scar that led directly to the base of the lighthouse. "Isabel will be watching the front door. We're going in through the cellar." He looked at me, the question unspoken in his eyes. "Are you ready?" I chambered a round in the pistol he'd given me, the sound a sharp, definitive answer in the tense silence. I was more than ready. I was cutting the line. The air inside the lighthouse was cold and damp, smelling of rust and a century of sea salt grinding stone to dust. A single bare bulb high above cast a sickly yellow light down the spiraling iron staircase, and the wooden floor at the base was slick with moisture, treacherous as a sheet of ice. But it wasn't the dampness that made my breath catch, it was the web. A complex, beautiful, an utterly lethal web of crimson laser beams crisscrossed the room. They emanated from small projectors mounted on the walls, forming an intricate lattice that blocked all paths to the staircase. At the center of the web, mounted on a tripod, was a pressurized glass canister filled with a shimmering, oily liquid concentrated digitalis. A series of automated hypodermic needles were aimed outward from it, rigged to fire in every direction if a single beam was broken. It was a death trap disguised as a work of art. As my eyes adjusted, I saw the pattern. The intersecting lines weren't random. They formed a shape. A bird, with its head thrown back in song. A nightingale. "She's not just trying to kill us," I whispered into my comms. Pulling my phone out, "She's trying to sign her work. She's framing Margot, even in death." Using the polarized lens from a pair of tactical sunglasses Arya had given me, I snapped a clear, high-contrast photo of the laser grid. The bird was unmistakable. Evidence. A voice echoed from the top of the winding staircase. "Isabel, did you really think it would be that easy?" Cassian. Cassian stepped out from behind me, into the faint light at the edge of the laser field. He didn't look at the trap. He looked up, his eyes boring into the darkness where she stood. "This was never about easy, Isabel. This was about honor, a concept you wouldn't understand. Honor." Her laugh was a brittle, ugly thing that scraped down the stone walls. "Honor is what got your father killed. He honored a deal with a man who had none. He died for a handshake. I am offering you a chance to evolve, to leave his antiquated sentimentality in the past where it belongs." "My father died because he believed a snake could grow a spine," Cassian retorted, his voice a low, cold fury. "He made one mistake. My mistake was allowing a snake like you to live in my city for so long." Suddenly, a side door creaked open. Dax. He stumbled into the room, his face pale with sweat, a pistol in his hand. He raised it, aiming it at Cassian, but the barrel trembled violently. His eyes were wide with terror. He was a pawn in a game he never wanted to play. Isobel's voice dripped with poison. "Finish it, Dax. Prove your loyalty." He licked his lips, his finger tightening on the trigger, but he hesitated. In that split second of indecision, I moved. I didn't run at him. I remembered my training on the roof. I remembered the angles. I swept my leg low, hooking his ankle, and twisted. He went down in a clumsy heap, his shot going wild, shattering the single light bulb and plunging us into near total darkness. Lit only by the menacing red glow of the laser grid, I was on him in a second, my knife at his wrist, forcing the gun from his grasp. I found a loose coil of anchor rope nearby and bound his hands, my knots sure and swift. Now Isabel shrieked from above. A loud click echoed from the center of the room. The trap was activated. A low, electronic hum began, and I saw the plungers on the hypodermics begin to retract. We had seconds. Cassian was already looking for a way through, a way around. There wasn't one. But I saw it. Not a path, but a pivot point, a single node where 3 beams intersected, the linchpin of the entire bird-shaped design. It was the same angle as the oil drum on the silo roof, the same reflexive shot I had practiced 100 times. "Cassian, cover me," I yelled. I didn't wait for a response. I raised the pistol he'd given me, planting my feet on the slick floor. I didn't aim. I felt the angle, the muscle memory. Breathe. Squeeze. The shot was an explosion in the enclosed space. The bullet hit the primary laser projector, shattering the lens. The entire grid flickered and died, the hum from the central trap cut out, the needles freezing a millimeter from firing. We were safe. A muzzle flash erupted from the top of the stairs. Isabel. She wasn't waiting. The bullet screamed past my ear, but the one behind it found its mark. I heard Cassian's sharp, pained grunt. He stumbled back, his hand flying to his shoulder. "Cassian!" I grabbed him, pulling him behind the thick central pillar that supported the staircase. I tore his shirt, my EMT training kicking in. It was a through and through, bleeding badly but clean. I pressed my hand hard against the entry wound, my other hand against the exit. My hands were shaking, but my eyes were clear. Stay with me. Pressure. I have to stop the bleeding. The world exploded in sound and light. The high, circular windows at the top of the lighthouse shattered inward as Arya and her team rappelled through, their weapons firing with disciplined, controlled bursts. The firefight was short, brutal, and utterly one-sided. Isobel's guards were neutralized in seconds. But Isobel was already gone, scrambling up the last flight of stairs. "Go," Cassian grunted, his face pale. "Finish it, Elodie." I left him with Arya and ran, taking the iron stairs 2 at a time, my pistol held tight in my hand. I burst out onto the narrow catwalk at the top of the lighthouse. The storm had arrived. Wind and rain lashed at me, a furious horizontal assault. Isobel stood by the railing, the huge lantern lens rotating behind her, its powerful beam cutting through the maelstrom. She was laughing, her hair whipping around her face. "See," she screamed over the wind, "this is what love does. It takes a king and turns him into a target. It makes the strong weak." "No," I yelled back, my voice raw against the storm. "You're wrong. It doesn't make them weak. It teaches them they're not alone." She lunged, a blade appearing in her hand as if from nowhere. I didn't try to meet her force with my own. I parried, using the flat of my gun to deflect her blade. As her arm overextended, I dropped my weapon, grabbing her wrist with one hand and her elbow with the other. I used her own forward momentum, her own rage, turning her body, twisting her arm until she cried out and the knife clattered to the wet metal deck. I kicked it away. It was over. I didn't kill her. I didn't have to. I held her there as Arya's voice, patched through the island's loudspeakers, began to speak. She was broadcasting the contents of Margot's drive, the bank transfers, the chemical formulas. Isobel's voice, from a secret recording Dax had made, calmly ordering Cassian's death. It was all there, laid bare for the world to hear. Down below, the blue and red lights of the port police boats, the clean ones. The ones Margot had contacted were cutting through the storm. Isobel sagged in my grip, defeated not by a bullet, but by the truth. Cassian, his arm in a makeshift sling, was standing beside me when they led her away in cuffs. He looked at me, not like I was an asset or a partner, but like I was a miracle. The Ravello Combine crumbled overnight. Dax, facing a reduced sentence, gave a full confession on camera. And Margot Wynne, under the official protection of the Rook lineage, became the star witness in the biggest corruption trial in Miami's history. As the sun rose, the storm broke. The sky was washed in pale, fragile shades of pink and gold. Cassian and I stood on the lighthouse catwalk, the wind now a gentle, cleansing breeze. It carried the faint scent of jasmine. I'd tucked a small, bruised flower from the Casa de Lirio into my pocket, a talisman I'd forgotten I had. "So what now?" he asked, his voice quiet. He looked out at the calm sea. "Which path do you choose?" "Elodie." I looked at his face, at the exhaustion and the pain, but also at the profound, unshakable strength. I thought of the sterile white walls of the hospital, the constant beeping of machines. Then I thought of the vibrant, chaotic life of my neighborhood. "I'm choosing the one that heals," I said softly. "But I'm not leaving you outside the gate." A slow, tired smile touched his lips. The Rook lineage could use some healing. It will be a long process, to make it clean. We returned to a different Miami. The city felt brighter, the air lighter. La Palmera had a string of new, colorful lanterns hanging over the entrance. And at the clinic, Maria Hart had a new, stable dialysis schedule and a top spot on the transplant list, all paid for by a quiet, anonymous grant from a newly formed Harbor Mercy Community Fund, no strings attached. The final scene wasn't set in a mansion or on a yacht. It was on a dusty basketball court in Little Havana. I had started a free weekly EMT training class for the neighborhood kids, funded by that same community grant. I was showing a young, eager teenager how to properly apply pressure to a wound. And in the background, leaning against a chain-link fence, unseen by anyone else, was Cassian. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in jeans and a simple gray shirt. He wasn't a boss. He was just a man, watching the woman he loved put something good back into a world that had tried to break them both. His eyes held a promise of a lifetime of quiet, unwavering protection. When the class was over, he met me at the gate. He didn't say a word. He just took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. He leaned in and kissed me, a soft, warm kiss that tasted of hope and sunshine and the promise of 1,000 quiet mornings to come. It was a new beginning, forged in the eye of the storm. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, so please drop a comment below to say hello and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Stories. Give this video a like, and consider hitting that hype button to help share it with even more listeners. Your support means the world to us.